Hello, in this video we're going to talk about input validation. Thus far when we've written our programs, we are at the mercy of the user to put in the correct data. When the user is responsible for putting in data, we know that the user may make a mistake when putting in that data. So let's go to your last lab, number 4, where we had the rental car program. If I ran this program, it's telling me to enter in a value for the rental code of W, E, C, or S. What if I put in T? Well, the program is not set up to handle T and would probably crash if the user put in the wrong data, or at least produce the wrong answers. Let's say I did put in the right rental code, but when it asked me for the number of days, I put in a negative number. This again would have a negative effect on the program, and the program would not produce the right data. So there's a way for me to, with user input, force the user to put in the data that we want before the user can go on. To do that, we will use something called an input validation loop. The general form of the input validation loop is to let the user put in the data first and then check that data for its validity. If the data is valid, we skip the loop altogether. But if the data is invalid, we will print out an error message and then have the user enter the data again. So here's an example of an input validation loop. In this case, we're asking the user to put in a choice of 1, 2, or 3. So the numbers must be between 1 and 3. The easiest way to think about this is to create a condition of what you want first. Once you create a condition of what you actually want, add the not to it to negate it, and that's saying that I did not get what I want, or I didn't get the condition. So I'm asking for a value between 1 and 3, so I have choices greater than or equal to 1 and choices less than or equal to 3. By putting the not there, I'm saying if you give me anything other than this condition, then it's invalid. And for this, we then print out an error message and ask the user to put in the choice again. If the user puts in the correct choice, this condition will be false and the code will continue on. We'll see an example of that in just a second. In this second example, I'm asking the user to put in a letter. So I want the user to put in A or D, A for add, D for delete. I have the user put the value in a variable called letter. And then again, let's forget about this not right here. My condition is if the value is an A or a lowercase a or a D or a lowercase d, this is exactly what I want. So by adding the not, I'm going to let that loop go if it's not what I want. I'm going to say it's an invalid value, try again and put in those values. So with the validation loop, my suggestion is create the condition of what you want and then add the not to it to negate it to force the person to stay within the loop. So let's go back to that program dealing with the rental car. Okay, so here's the rental car program again written with the data validation loops. So you see here I'm asking for the rental code of W, E, C, or S. And I have a condition here that says if it's the W, the E, the C, or the S, it's okay. But then I negate it and say, if you don't give me what I want, so if it's not any of these, then print an error message saying invalid and put that code in again. We'll look at that in a second. For the next one, for number of days, I want number of days to be a positive number greater than 0. The condition I want is number of days greater than 0, and I stick a not here to say you're not giving me what I want, it's invalid, I'll do it again. These conditions can be written another way, but for me it's more intuitive to write it the way you want it and then negate it. So for instance, I could take away the not and say while the number is less than or equal to 0, then the value is invalid. Loop again to give me the right value. So here I'm actually putting a case that says while the number is less than or equal to 0, keep looping because it's invalid. But to me, that does not sound as intuitive as saying while it's not what I want, keep looping until you give me what I want. The reason this works better is because if we go back up here to these letters, this gets a little convoluted if you start saying not equal to W and not equal to lowercase w. The ands become ors, and there's an actual law based on how to create that. It's much easier to put what you want and then negate it. So I'm doing the same thing for the miles. I want a positive number. And then for the customer preference, I'm saying I want it to be Y or N. And if it's not, then it's invalid, try again. So understand that these loops will trap the user inside the loop until they put in the correct information. So let's run this program. And it's asking for W, but I'm going to put in P. And when I put in P, it says invalid letter into the correct letter. If I put in V, it still says invalid. Put in the correct letter, and it will keep doing that until I put in the correct letter of W. Now we're off to the next thing, and it's saying enter the number of days rented. If I put in -5, it says invalid. Enter the number of days again. Notice I kind of echo that invalid down here also, because if you run this outside of PyScripter, everything will come on the screen in sequence. But with PyScripter, we have this pop-up box for the input, and the output is in a different area. So I'm going to put in a valid number of days, and now it's asking me for the number of miles. Again, even if I put in 0, it's going to say invalid. You can't rent a car and drive it 0 miles. So I'll put in that I drove the car 50 miles. And then it's asking me for whether I'm a preferred customer, and I'll put in 1. And of course, 1 is not a valid entry, so it's asking me to put that in again. And I do notice for that, I did not put invalid down here in the prompt, as well as on the side in the output. So I'm going to put in Y, I'm a preferred customer, and then I get the output over here. So this is input validation by using a loop to validate the input before the user goes on. By doing that, now I don't have to have a default case for these things. I know it's going to be W, E, C, or S. There's no way it can be anything else because I'm validating the input. So there's an exercise in the handout that I gave you to write some input validation loops. And of course, 9, if you go back and look at the rental car program, you will see that I have already completed 9. It should not be a far stretch for you to complete number 10. Instead of Y and N, it's A and R. Try to write that input validation loop yourself. And then write one that will allow the number to be in between 1 and 5. Again, I just showed you one where the numbers were between 1 and 3. So you try to do that one on your own also. And for this last one, I am actually going to write something similar to this. But before I do for number 12, I want you to try it on your own. Okay, so I have set up the skeleton of a question that's very similar to number 12. And what I want to do with this is I want the user to enter in an amount to withdraw from a bank account. The balance is $500. So instead of here it tells me to enter a positive multiple of 10, I'm going to further scrutinize that and say I want a positive multiple of 10 that's between 10 and whatever my balance is. So I have to have a condition here to do that, okay? Notice if the condition is not right, if the input is not right, I'm again saying invalid selection, please try to put in that amount again. So let's create that condition first. The first thing, of course, is I want amount to be greater than or equal to 10. That's a given. But I also want the amount to be less than or equal to the balance. So if someone tries to withdraw $800 and we only have a balance of $500, that should not work. That should be an invalid choice. So I have an and conjunction there that says the number must be both greater than or equal to 10 and less than or equal to the balance. But I also want it to be a multiple of 10. So I'm going to add and this amount must be a multiple of 10. How do I do that? I mod it by 10, and if it's equal, then it is a multiple of 10. So that is what I want, okay? If they put in that value, I should not loop. So what I have to do then is add the not to it to negate it and say, I'm only going to loop if you do not give me what I want here. So let's see how this program works. I put in 15. It says invalid, must be a multiple of 10. I put in negative 20. It says invalid, must be a multiple of 10. I could say a positive multiple of 10. I put in 700. We know that that's invalid, and of course it won't accept that value. Now, if I wanted to, I could have within that data validation multiple if statements to say, if it's this condition, if it's a negative number, say that also. Or if it's greater than the balance, say that also. So I can have a bunch of elifs to allow me to hone in on exactly what that error was. So I'm going to put in 20 here, which is a correct value, and I see that it ran and gave me the new balance and the amount of withdrawal. So this again is a data validation loop. It keeps me in the loop until I put in the correct value.